I tell you, when it comes to parenting, it's the dignity that you give your child and the pride in themselves and who they are deep inside. That's your gift. Well, that can be given oftentimes more easily out of poverty and out of challenge than it can be out of abundance. The real problem is you don't have pride in yourself. You know, a guy who's got pride in themselves is like, I don't care, I want to make it work. But we allow ourselves to be abashed by the fears of what they're going to take away from us. It would be much worse for us to lose our freedom than to lose our abundance.
The whole world is sick.
Are you worried about America? I am.
Believe the impossible and you can do the incredible.
Well, welcome to another episode of The Catholic Patriot. I'm your host, Dr. Peter Howard, and I am very excited to have back once again, it's been a couple of years now, Father Nathan Cromly. He's the founder and president of the St. John Institute out in Denver, Colorado. Highly recommend that you check this out. We'll talk a little bit more about that probably at the end. So, Father, welcome back. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, I'm honored to be with you.
Father, I think the last time we might have had a long introduction, so I'm not going to go much into that. I really want to jump into things with you in light of really this whole spirit of Fulton Sheen. As you know, we have recently launched through what we're calling the Fulton Sheen movement, a petition that is really creating a collective voice and bringing renewed attention to the importance of his beatification. All we have to do is set the date, and it can happen in the next month if they wanted. But one of the things I've enjoyed learning from my guests is what influence Venerable Fulton Sheen has had on their own lives. And as one who's, I consider very similar in the way that you were formed and the way that you think and do a lot of things. I see a lot of similarities. I'm curious to know, and I'm sure our audience is, what his influence has been in your own life, and where did he come from, and at what point, at what point in your life did you encounter him?
Well, I encountered him first through his autobiography when I was discerning my vocation. It just was one of those standard books that everybody talked about, and so I read it, and I remember very well when I was reading it how powerfully it impacted me, and his stories and the depth of who he was. Then upon falling in love, so to speak, through the autobiography, my aunt revealed that when he had actually come to my hometown of Toledo, Ohio, to preach at a pro-life event in 1972, and that my aunt was the one who was selected to pick him up at the airport. So she picked him up at the airport, drove him to the restaurant, had dinner, along with a little group of the leadership team from the pro-life talk with Fulton Sheen. And then he, gave his talk. And then at the end of the night, he invited them for a nightcap. And she was really kind of a little bit scandalized by that thought, of a nightcap with Fulton Sheen. But how are you going to say no? So they went together to the hotel, and there in the lobby, he went up to the bar and ordered milk and cookies, which was his nightcap. And she tells that story. Then they had such a wonderful time that she had his picture signed. She sent him a picture, and he signed it, with warmest regards to her, and she treasured that. So then she would tell the story over and over again. So, but in a personal way, therefore, via my great aunt, and then the autobiography. Then, of course, I started to listen to his presentations. His holy hour, teaching on the holy hour, became something personal as I moved into the priesthood and my formation. An essential part of who I am. Then I was assigned to Peoria, Illinois, where, of course, he was ordained. And at the time of the miracle that was for his beatification, I was involved to a small degree. The family at the moment of the birth reached out to me and asked if I'd be willing to say, a mass for the little child while he was still in the state of recovery. And so I did. I dropped everything. We drove to the cathedral, and there was like 80 people there, and they gave us the holy card with the prayer on it for the baby's miracle. And I remember, at the time just being very moved because there we were in the cathedral of Fulton Sheen where he was ordained. And I was the priest to say mass for these people. And I remember the intense faith of that family. And I'll bear witness to that. There they were with their son, in this, state. And they were so confident. They came to see me in the sacristy, and we prayed together then, and we got the card, and then we went forward, and the whole congregation knelt on both knees, and I knelt exactly in the spot where he was ordained a priest, and we recited that prayer together. So I'm sure it wasn't that moment. It had nothing to do really with me. It was the faith of that family. But, I was part of witnessing that act of intercession and witnessing the faith of the family that would, in the end, be instrumental for the cause of his beatification.
Wow. I totally forgot about that point. And
yeah, it was neat. I mean, I'm not a player in that. I wasn't asked to testify or anything, but it was something. The mom and dad's faith in Jesus Christ was, and then all of those friends. It was something that marked me in my priesthood, and I'm sure that God responded to the prayers.
Wow. How about Fulton Sheen, the man, the philosopher, the theologian, the prophet, all the things that he represented as his own biographer said after he finished writing his book, he said he was the most significant figure of 20th century Catholic America. And how has Sheen impacted your own life?
Well, I am in many ways trying to do a work similar to his. I am not going to go to the masses quite as openly as him. I'm not a bishop. But to see him fill stadiums and to preach the good news with conviction, and to see his desire to engage modernity. Thinking of the books that he wrote on psychology. It wasn't even psychology, but it was basically like Catholic psychology. That was daring. That was daring because I'm sure there were many people that would criticize an approach like that, talking about happiness or talking about, the ways of educating people or what your emotions are. Books that are a little bit less known about him, but that represent an audacity of intelligence, that he wanted to go out and engage the world. He wanted to engage the world. That's why I think it's fitting that he was in charge of the missions. He I think may have preferred a different position, but I'm very happy that he was in charge of the missions because he represents that spirit of evangelization, and an evangelization that wasn't without an awareness of the intelligence of the people he was addressing, or of the advances that modern society represented. Like, I don't find his spirit to be one of I'm thinking of a fancy word that starts with an R that I can't think of because it's too fancy. Not recalcitrance, but where you pull back. Where he, I don't see that in him into a type of defensive mode. He went out engaged, but with total fidelity to the church's magisterium. I'm thinking of the last retreat he gave to priests, and he said, he prayed, a long time before giving this retreat. And I remember listening to that retreat on cassette tapes as he gave it. And so you have this weight of Catholicism in its truest sense, open and engaging. And I'd like to say that that's influenced me because it's nice to have a model for what I'd like to do with the St. John Institute. I'd like to represent a missionary spirit towards our modern world. And just like Fulton Sheen, and I condemn no one, I think everyone's got a place in the church, including those who want to withdraw more and criticize And I think there's room for everybody, you know. But I know that I'd like to be amongst those that try to enter into the fray and bring the message of the perennial faith in a new expression for the salvation of our society. And so I find his example to be inspiring, consoling, and invigorating, you know, because he did that, and he paid the price. He paid the price from the right. He paid the price from the left. But in the end, he was working for the Lord. So I think it is mostly in terms of an inspiration and an example to follow.
Yeah, I think he really was. He was definitely a pioneer. He, of course, when it came to the Catholic Church entering the media, and this is all pre-internet. This is pre-cable, you know. So you have a few stations on television, but to learn things like he had 30 million viewers a week, and 60% of his audience was non-Catholic. You know, these are the kinds of things that you mentioned. There are some similarities in things that you're doing that he also stood for and was doing. And I think one of those key things is leadership. Like, he stepped up and really put the Catholic Church on the map. Many younger Catholics and sometimes tend to think that the Catholic Church has always kind of enjoyed certain favor or respect, but the Church hasn't really been respected in our country for much. And well, look at today; it's not really respected at all. But for him, he put it on the map. And you know, another similarity I've seen when you mentioned the St. John Institute, which is all about forming leaders for our times, strong Catholic leaders, and was his passion for two things. One, for souls, because he said, unless souls are saved, nothing is saved. And then, secondly, he says, I want to know what the modern world is thinking. I want to know everything. He says, because otherwise, how can we actually engage? Like you said, how can we engage it? And so when somebody asks him, like, well, what do you study in order to do that? He says, anything that is useful for me getting in front of another person to evangelize them. So if it was something in the sciences, he found out what the person was or the issue was, and he studied everything he could about that. Like, I'd probably read a chapter or two and some footnotes. Like, when he references something, he's read the whole thing. And then he says, I want to respond to all the world's errors with the teaching of St. Thomas Aquinas. Well, a lot of people don't know that, but he was very explicit about that. And I think it's interesting because your formation is very similar. You're first formed in philosophy and then theology, which is the normal progression of the formation of priests. But a lot of religious who don't become priests aren't normally formed in much of anything like that. And so his unbelievable formation of philosophy has given him or had given him a tremendous insight into what actually governs the world and leads the world. I'd love to know your thoughts on that, because I can't imagine everything that you're doing not being filtered through this philosophical lens. You know, Sheen said, that's all that really matters. He says, ultimately the problems are theological, but it plays out in the battle of philosophies, which he said are at war. So how does that affect your own experience and what you're doing and with the St. John Institute?
Well, let me just advance the conversation just a little bit. Let's just enter into it together, Peter, because, the way I'd respond to that question would be biographical about St. John Institute, but we don't really care about that.
Exactly. Well, yeah, you're right. Let's just go right into it. Let's Sheenize together and philosophize.
Yeah. Because as an evangelist, the thing that I think we both stumble upon eloquently is the lack of logic. I'm thinking of Aquinas, who asked that students first learn geometry before learning theology, because without the rigor of thought and proof and dependent statements one upon the next, you can't even begin to understand the faith. In terms of in a philosophical way or an academic way. And I absolutely agree. So what we're really struggling with today is the philosophies themselves are so patently weak. I mean, materialism, there's no way it can express the depth of human dignity. So you take a materialist and you put their arguments, straight up against what Christian faith offers, or what even a sound philosophy offers as a vision of the human person. And it's evident that materialism opens itself up immediately into a lack of human rights, and therefore the triumph of the rich or the powerful over the poor. And it doesn't matter anyway, because I guess the height of our existence from a materialistic perspective is to reproduce better genes. And, you could just shoot that down in a million different ways. Until what end should you reproduce better genes? And by what scale do you determine them to be better, considering the fact that there's nothing but a materialist construct for a frame of reference? I mean, it's just ridiculous. And yet that materialism is what's transformed the sexuality and our vision for our family. But like, you look at that and you're like, the world is going to be thirsty for the church. The hearts are going to be burning for the proclamation of the faith. But the problem isn't materialism. The problem is skepticism, meaning that our people refuse to acknowledge the power of the attraction of truth because they cut themselves off from being able to affirm it. And that is a deadlier virus, because now you've got a world that denies truth exists at all and denies their capacity to attain it. This has led some people to hypothesize that we're really looking at the end of the world, because it's like the human intelligence itself has become, has been tainted by its ability to affirm truth. And that's where it's hard, because our Catholicism, our Catholic formation, it's like, all of this stuff. You have tons of books you could read and cite, but you're in front of audiences that absolutely are not interested in the ideas. And so we have to find a new way to reawaken the people's desire to live based on intelligence, in order to then bring them the full weight of the beautiful propositions that we have to make to them. And I find that that's the challenge of the age. And I wonder if Fulton Sheen doesn't have if he encountered the same thing, and how he went about rehabilitating the minds.
Well, his very first major writing was his doctorate dissertation, and it was God and Intelligence. And this was like the midway point from the French Revolution until the modern world that we're in. And he really nailed it. To summarize the whole work, is basically God is intelligence. So if you remove God from the world progressively, or larger, sweeps of things, or swoops, I don't know what the word is, but anyway, you begin to see this deterioration of intelligence in society, and then that ripples into eventually morality. And then he would say, and that erosion of morality then opens the door for communism to come in, Marxism and communism, which all has this as part of its agenda. And this is a man who knew Marx better than the Marxists, and communism better than the communists. And that's why he kept focusing on this. You have to understand what philosophy is at war. Ultimately, it's a religion, because it's about God and Satan. But how the war takes place in the intelligence. So anyway, he's like, once you remove God, you have ultimately what we have now. And that's why when you started talking about intelligence, I was thinking about that two things. One was, we live in a post-rational world, so it's almost as if like the intelligence seems to play very little role. And if you go through the progression of things, not even in the last 100 years, the last 20 years, to have some issues, like homosexuality was probably one of the big moral issues when it came to, with the sexual things, and promiscuity was pretty much well accepted, but like that was man, woman, you didn't really go there. But in the last 5 years, and then you see now the woke culture. And I just listened to a guy, I wish, I need to get the reference. It was just yesterday. It was in the background. He gave this speech in front of this body of politicians somewhere, and he went through the whole history of Marxism and how it is intentionally designed to ultimately end in wokeism. And it's an actual word, not just some cultural made-up word. He says it is the full embodiment where the complete confusion of what it means to be man and what it means to be woman, having no attachment to anything other than wokeism represents the antithesis of whatever the norm is. So there's never a norm. And so it's like, so when you were mentioning just that word intelligence, I was like, oh, how do you really converse with somebody like that? Then you add to that the simultaneous route right now of artificial intelligence, which ties into a bigger agenda that's none of these things are hidden. It's right in our face, of what they call transhumanism, where eventually humans and robotics will unite or merge, and through some kind of union of the two, there will be like this superhuman who could live forever, and whose consciousness, that, as they say, I mean, they claim all things can be uploaded. It's like, but God is completely out of that picture. It is like Lucifer totally wins from the beginning. Like, we will make, God after our own image, and we will truly be like God, knowing everything, science. And so I'm really curious about your thoughts on, and I threw a lot out there, but in this post-rational moment, and then this emergence and the big threat, almost everybody's afraid of like what AI can do. What should we understand about these things? Because it's like, it really is a tsunami right now of everything that deteriorates a culture. On top of that, economic deterioration, collapsing, banks are collapsing in front of us. People saying, it's like everybody's like, whoa, the rug's being pulled out, but yet the intelligence and there's still, we have to be using ours. So how? I get overwhelmed thinking about it. So I'm glad you're here to explain all that. Unpack what I just said with the clearest answer.
Well, I think there's a couple things we can do. The number one thing, when you're facing confrontation or a battle of some sort, the number one rule is to love yourself and to be confident in the God who's inside of you and in your heart. Fear, in other words, is the antithesis of leadership, which is why Jesus says, do not be afraid. Because if you're afraid, you're a slave. You're a slave of the one who is you're trying to combat. When David went out to Goliath, he had no fear. When Paul went to offer his head, no fear. St. Peter, flip me upside down. St. Lawrence, turn me over on the thing. There's these examples given to us of, you might feel fear. That's not it. But it's like you feel fear, but you don't obey it. Because we have someone inside of us. This is St. John. The one who is within you is bigger than the one who is in the world. And I want to remind my Christians of this, because I am tired of us acting like somehow what's coming our way is going to be bigger than us. Bigger than you, maybe, but not bigger than Jesus. And if you stand in Jesus, you'll find a way. And you say, well, prove that. If someone could say, prove that to me. And I said, oh, I can't prove it, but you'll see me. You'll see me as I go my way. The Lord is not going to abandon his church. He wins. He's in charge of this world. The tactic of the evil one is to act as if the world is in his control. And we remember that the whole world's in the little hand of baby Jesus. Go back and look at your infant of Prague statue. Whole world, baby Jesus in his hand, And guys, we have to remember that. When I do that, then I obey that first rule. You will not break my heart. You will not penetrate my heart. You will not have any access to my heart. And my heart is full of fire. Right? Then you move forward into engage in the weak points of the enemy. Right? So you don't go for where the enemy's strong. You go for where the enemy's weak. And so where's the enemy strong? Well, a computer system will create algorithms that are an astounding amount of proportions to imitate human behavior and human thought, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm like, okay, you're really strong there. I'm not going to attack you there, but I'll tell you where you're really weak. And that's that your children are bored and your marriages are falling apart and your hearts are restless. Right? Because this is a line I take an inspiration from John Paul II in his Crossing the Threshold of Hope, when they asked him in his book, Crossing the Threshold of Hope, 1994, everyone should read it. But they asked the Holy Father, what or why did communism fall? And the guy writes it kind of like leading him up to answer Our Lady of Fatima, because he's basically like, Fatima promises us this, why did communism fall? And like, you think he's going to give a really spiritual answer, and he doesn't. He says communism fell because it could not satisfy the human spirit. It was intrinsically limited. And so eventually humanity threw it off. Now, it's an interesting answer. And one could say, yeah, well, tell that to China, which seems to be prospering. And I'll say, well, God has a funny sense of time. It's been prospering for 120 years. Maybe we'll make it 120 more, but eventually, And so I get it, that short term, that's not satisfying. What I would say to folks in their individual life is, the truth. Live the truth and deepen yourself in the truth. You have a mind, and you're listening to podcasts that obviously reaffirm that. Utilize this and start to study your faith, read Fulton Sheen, and get it deep down inside of your hearts. And then go out going for the weak points, going for the relationships that you can easily speak to, and speak to them of the splendor of what you found. I think that maybe the only answer in a culture like this is to evangelize, to go on the offense. Because if you go on the defense with a culture like this, you will be killed. I've been reading a lot of history ever since the 2020 election, when you kind of realize, like, look, this is a kind of crazy situation we're living in. Maybe watching the news is not even going to tell me the truth. I started reading history, and I'm really amazed at how heartily wars were fought. When the Texas Rangers went in to challenge the Comanches, or the Comanches went in to challenge the Texas Rangers, both sides were going to fight to the death. Like, we think, well, oh no, these police officers out there, and then they won't get hurt. Like, the Texas Rangers were ready to die, or else they would not engage in the battle. And the same with the Comanche Indians. They were ready to die. You go back to Tecumseh, who was the Shawnee Indian chief who was attacking the Kentuckians. He was putting his life on the line and braving the shots of rifles, all for what he believed in. And the same thing with the Kentuckians when they went back and attacked the Shawnee. And you go back over all kinds of things in history. When you look at the Wright brothers inventing their airplane, like, they were 20 feet off the ground. They would die, ready to die in order to fly. And so I'm not, talking about physical death or violence as something that, like, I'm espousing, but I'm saying, like, where's that spirit for us? Why are we so timid? We're afraid of the Super Bowl halftime show. We're afraid of the World Economic Forum. I guess you can be if you want to be, but like, hey, look, I'm here in a brief time on earth. I'm in the service of Almighty God, and I'm asking him to lead me. Why should I then let my fears lead me instead? And so how to do that effectively? I think that, how do you evangelize effectively in the modern context? I think you go back to nature. I think that's our ally. We're strong in nature, natural beauty, natural experiences. It's hard to be an atheist, or when you're, trying to, fish your fish out of a pond, skin them, and eat them with your friends around a campfire. It's kind of funny how the conversation shifts from weird thinking into reality. When you're climbing mountains, when you're shooting bears and skinning them alive, you're trying to haul out 1,000 pounds of buffalo or 1,000 pounds of elk, like, there's a reality that comes in there. Nature, great working spot. Second spot where we have an ally is in the realism of work. I mean, the horrific visions of these rich multinationalists that want to take work away from people and give them some sort of standardized salary. It'll never work. Work is joy. People enjoy working. You can't change that. Well, there's an ally point for us. Why is that? Where does that come from? What's the ultimate point? What's the best kind of work to do? Wherever humanity reaches in excellence. Third vantage point that we can leverage is friendships. I mean, there again, they can reprogram stuff. You will never satisfy a heart without selfless spiritual love and the love between friends, companionship of hearts. So work, you could throw art into that if you want. Nature. I then take those three things and I utilize their appeal to the heart to then awaken, or in a relationship, awaken the mind to the one who's on the other side of these experiences. What I can't get around for everybody is that it is a painful process, a slow process, and it's not 100% effective. And for that, I just look at the fact that, hey, St. Paul got laughed at when he spoke about faith in the Areopagus. He got laughed at, scoffed at, and dismissed. And yet he was St. Paul and he was speaking truth. When Jesus Christ was on the earth, they laughed at him. They called him possessed by the devil. They didn't listen to him. They arrested him and then they killed him. And so it's like, will we convert everybody? No. But should I allow my spirit to be crushed? Never. What do I have to do? I got to accept them. It's in God's hands. But I'm not going to walk through my life being kowtowing to these forces or being bullied by a world that's weak. Instead, I'm going to go at it. I'm going to go at it with patience. I'm going to go at it in every way I can. But, Dr. Howard, I think if your listeners did nothing more than take their bloody grandkids' phones from their hands when they come to visit their house, they'd be halfway to victory, But you don't. You guys are afraid to take your cell phones away from the grandkids. You're afraid to pray at Thanksgiving. You're living in fear all the time over the social context. You're afraid to confront someone and not go to a wedding. Well, what are they going to think? I don't know, but why don't you talk to them and say why you're not going to go, and that you still love them and that you hope the best for them, but that you also have certain things in your hearts that you just have to be, but why don't we do that? And that's the bigger problem. In other words, I think that the fact is not Goliath. It's not Goliath that's the problem. It's the lack of Davids. We wish that we were a Goliath to fight Goliath. That's not God's way. He asked a simple, person in far-flung Nazareth to accept to be the mother of God, to be the hero of the universe. And the Virgin Mary said yes. Well, she's a little David. What's she going to do in the presence of whatever? It's all up to God who's the real hero. And you've got to just be willing to go into the battle and fight for what you know is right. And go after the weak points, leverage your strengths, let no one touch your heart, and God will do the rest.
Amen. There's always this, in a lot of conversations that I find myself getting into, or threads, even people who are close, not like just generic ones out there, this battle between, well, he's got this, it's going to take care of it. And, I'm going to have faith, I'm going to have trust. But there's a sense of like quietism behind that, of I'm not going to do anything about it. And almost like, well, let the Goliaths kind of do their thing. And if I happen to be eaten by lions, I'm eaten by lions. And then it's like, well, that's not what God has even taught us or revealed to us. It's like, they're like, David did go out and these things, I just
the problem isn't you being eaten by lions; it's that your kids are being eaten by lions, and you're sitting in the stands. That's
exactly. So I'm eventually kind of transitioning to a question of leadership, in particular for men and for fathers. But when when I've been reading and researching, I've been going back through the popes and like, what have they been saying about these about the modern world? Because there's a prophetic sense that they've had that often gets ignored. And I have a quote in front of me. This is from, I'll put on the screen, Leo the 13th from Humanum Genus, when he was pointing out who the evil forces really are. And he was talking about the Freemasons. Today, people are like, oh my gosh, that's like, can't mention that's conspiracy. When it's like, it's all admitted. But this is like 150 years ago. And he says, and you could just use these words for right now. He says, at so urgent a crisis, when so fierce and suppressing an onslaught is made upon the Christian name, it is our office to point out the danger, to mark who are the adversaries, and to the best of our power to make head against their plans and devices, that those may not perish whose salvation is committed to us, and that the kingdom of Jesus Christ entrusted to our charge may not stand and remain whole, but may be enlarged by an ever-increasing growth throughout the world. And just to fast forward a little bit more, a few decades later with Pius XI, he says the decay of civilization is to be found in a propaganda so truly diabolical that the world has perhaps never seen its like before. It is directed from one common center. It is shrewdly adapted to the varying conditions of diverse peoples. It has at its disposal great financial resources, gigantic organizations, international congresses, and countless trained workers. It makes use of pamphlets, reviews, cinema, theater, radio, schools, even universities. Little by little, it penetrates into all classes of the people and even reaches the better-minded groups of the community, with the result that few are aware of the poison which increasingly pervades their minds and hearts. And then he goes into, he says, it can surprise no one that the communistic fallacy should be spreading in a world already to a large extent de-Christianized. So you have these popes talking about kind of what Jesus does. Like, go out and actually evaluate, like, know who your enemy is so you can gauge what you need to go against it. But how do we gauge this kind of teaching and rhetoric with, well, some may say, but I'm just going to go out and I guess ignore all of that and just focus on, I don't know, just one dimension of evangelizing. And I can almost see their argument. Like, you don't want to be obsessed with that, but you also don't quite maybe know what you're fighting and how your message needs to some degree, like Sheen would do, like how he would use that so he knows how to counter it. And I think that's what you were saying too. If everything is evil and stripped and dehumanized, well, you have to counter it with showing, like John Paul II did underground in Poland, the humanization, the spirit, the passion, and the theater, underground, like the spirit of Poland. And anyway, this is in my world at least, this is a common back and forth is, I don't need to know these things. They just depress me. And there's really nothing I can do about it. When the church is saying you actually need to, shouldn't our response to a certain degree, or maybe a massive degree, be if they're, they have great, gigantic organizations and all these kinds of things. Why aren't we doing these things? It's like when I talk to people, they're like, I don't want to get out into that thing because then the fear comes in. It's like, we want to do all these things without putting ourselves out there. I personally think that's impossible. But what's the answer?
Well, I mean, there's obviously a lot to be said for that. Like, and, as I look at it, I think, okay, what would God say to all this? And I think he would say, it's according to your state in life and according to the vocation he's given you. That's the number one way where evil's going to be turned back. And there are some who are called to enter into the fray at the international level, the organizational level, and they need to follow that call. And there's others who honestly are not called to do that and have their call squarely in front of them. What's at the heart of both of those scenarios, though, is the necessity to lead. And what I call leadership is not a matter of you having followers. It's a matter of you warping space and time towards your love, meaning making an influence. And I'm going to get on everyone here, Dr. Howard, because I mean, I agree with you about the need for us to have leaders who engage at that level, and but they're going to have to do the same thing that the mom at home is going to have to do. And that's to gain the conviction inside necessary for you to then live out what you are convicted of and convinced of. We are people without principles, and therefore Fulton Sheen has a lot to say about that. And you referenced men, and I absolutely say this. The moment I'm thinking of the work that we do at St. John Institute with marriages, we do a very simple little thing called date nights. It's been an extraordinary experience of evangelization. I'm just going to share with you just a little bit of victory on this, because all we do is, I mean, it's my favorite thing to preach at. I love them. We gather about 6 o'clock. It goes from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock. It's all celebratory. a celebration of you and your spouse and your marriage. And so, of course, there's, libations, there's music, there's food, and there's fellow Christians. And we'll have, in one room, we'll have 250 people, at a time doing this thing. And what I do is I preach 3 different times for brief periods, 20, 25 minutes. And then you have another 15 minutes of break and you're socializing, and then another 20, 25 minutes and then break. And what I'm telling you, the reason I'm sharing this with you is that I'll get people in that room who are not practicing their faith, who are not in the state of grace. I've stopped counting, the number of people who've told me that these events have saved their marriages. I just had one guy say that he dragged his son to the date night with his new wife, and they were not wanting to come. The son was not practicing the faith. It's outside the church. Through hearing me preach about the necessity to lead their families, the son is now back to church, practicing every Sunday in a state of grace and leading the family in prayer. And what I've touched upon is that most men do not realize that they are going to be judged based upon the leadership that they've exerted in their families. Then it's the wife too. You lead together with your wife, yet the husband is the head of his wife. And I know it's an unpleasant thing for a lot of people to hear. It's not something most Catholic priests talk about, but I tried to avoid it for years. And I just keep reading my Bible, and I'm like, it's in the darn Bible explicitly. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 11. You can go ahead and read it if you want. Paul says it just verbatim. A husband, the man is the head of his wife. So that doesn't mean an inequality, but it does mean a difference of roles, and that God wanted leadership out of us. And so here's what I'm trying to say. If you were to step up your spirituality and your own conviction in your heart and ask yourself, is my marriage where it needs to be? Is my wife being fed and protected adequately? You would start to turn the whole world around. Because once the two of you are on the same page and she's respecting you and you're loving her, oh my goodness, now we got an amazing energy. It's going to be transformed with the kids. And now my family has a direction because dad's got a direction. Mom's got a direction. We know where we're going. And your kids and your family culture starts to become, well, of course, a seed bed for God. And evangelization is done in that way. Once you've got yourself in order there, what's next? Your work. You're not going to go into work and be pushed around. You're going to instead stand your ground. Say who you are. Demand your rights. Move forward boldly. Now, I'm not saying brashly. I'm not saying without intelligence. And I'm not saying it's always possible. But wherever it is possible, you're going to start to move. And you know what will happen? People will follow you. Other people will start to catch the flame. So what do we do in the face of the global conspiracy of the Freemasons? I think that then there are people that are called to go at it. And where are our authors? Where are our social scientists? Where are our commentators, our journalists? And they're out there watching this podcast right now. Well, I'm summoning you into the battle. Let's go, folks. Everyone's got a part to play. And why not? Like I said, though, for me anyway, it's not a question of criticizing and tearing down only. I think that you got to do that to a degree, but darn it all, I'd like to save the Antichrist soul. I read Father Elijah. Maybe it had an impact on me. I don't know. But let's go after Soros. I'd like to see him baptized, and I'd like to see Madonna convert to Catholicism, And so come on, people of art, people of it's like, I think, so going back into it, once you get the spirit inside of you of those convictions and you realize that you want to let those convictions radiate forth, you become a weapon for Christ. And then if you're in Hollywood or if you're on Wall Street or if you're at Washington, D.C., or if you're in New York at the United Nations, he's able to use you. And those who are wealthy are able to serve with their wealth. Those, I'm just saying it's every one of us, though. It's not just the stars. I do bemoan the lack of heroes. I wish we had them. But I can say everyone who follows the Lord with that same desire and zeal is a hero. And I'll finish with this maybe as a perspective of hope. Remember how God always fights against the enemies by raising up saints. Our crisis today, I believe, I like George Rutler's book, A Crisis of Saints. I do agree with that. The power of one person to change the world is the way that God operates. And maybe you are that one. But everyone should step forward and then let God, do it from there. That's my response to what you said. It didn't really tick for tack but I guess I have a little bit of a different approach to it too. And that's when I see the ground game, Dr. Howard, because like I'm involved in the evangelization. I do barehanded evangelization with individuals. I'll give you an example. I work with a business, right? The business, I'm trying to help the business owners to bring a Catholic culture into their business. Why? Because they can. They have 200 employees. That means 200 families that we're directly protecting by that business and then encouraging. So then the company says, we want you to bring what you brought to the company to the people's families. So they hosted a date night just for their company. And that crowd, I would say 85% of them were not going to church. And yet we did a survey at the end of the date night. And it was unreal, the responses from these people about how they're so hungry for what I gave them in terms of communication, conflict resolution, stress management for them, and applied it to their families. That they're like, we are now going to be able to talk and live better as families. And then at the end of the night, I gave them my personal witness, so in a way it didn't impose upon them as employees, but I was able to give them my witness as a believer. And I actually had a fellow come up to me and he said, it's been 15 years since I've come to church and I want to come back to Jesus after hearing you preach. And all those people, they're not going to register in some sort of they're not even going to church. They're just average, everyday Americans. And one night, I was able to win them back over. And we had, of the surveys, 100% of the surveys were, we love this. The average rating of stars would have been a 4.95, what I mean, out of 5 stars. They loved it. And yet they weren't even going to church. And that speaks to me because I'm like, hey, if I can save 200, that's a lot. And give me another one and give me another one. There's a value to the ground game because in the ground game, you actually win literal gains instead of, shooting to knock down, some multinational corporation. I think if you can change one person, remember Billy Graham, his big thing when he turned the corner to become a huge sensation, it was that he was preaching in Los Angeles at a thing. Well, it just so happened he was preaching. It was average crowd size. He did it for like 10 days, 12 days. And it was average crowd size. It just so happened in one of those nights, there was the head of all of the biggest newspaper conglomerate in the whole city. I think it was his wife, snuck in and listened to Billy Graham. She went back and told her husband. Her husband issued a memo to all of the newspapers that he owned saying, Pump Graham. Pump Graham. So all the newspaper articles suddenly flood the thing. The newspaper journalists, they're taking pictures, etc. He gets on the front page of every newspaper, on the radio show. He extends his mission, and now it's sellout crowds. The tents are swelling. And it was because of that he became the international phenomenon that he was. And all the preaching that he did, it was by one person who showed up and who used her influence in one way. I really believe that Goliath is weak. And I believe that dragons have a soft spot. And I also believe that God's going to use us to bring them down. But all of us need to reclaim our courage and then go after it. What do you got to lose except your soul?
Wow. Thank you for all of that, Father. We're going to be wrapping up in just a minute, but just one quick comment is, I think what you said just really hit me, and how much the devil, his deception is all based in perception. And we all hear that phrase, perception is reality. It's not reality in the sense, you know what I mean? Like if you want to be metaphysical, but it is, but that is how the world sees reality, is through perception. And maybe just transition, using that as a final question for you, is it kind of finishes up your thought, I think, when you answer this. For those who they're listening, and it's like the Emmaus experience, right? Gosh, my heart is burning within me. I'm resonating with Father saying, I want courage. But you know what? I also can't deny these realities, which are by design imposed evils right now to economically strain people, kind of like one of the temptations of Jesus that Sheen talks about, when the devil offers him bread, give the people something to fill their bellies and then they'll follow you. Well, the devil knows that if he can, he can control a lot with that, with economics. And they're like, but I would love to do something more, or maybe it feels great, but the risk of finding something if it fails, it just paralyzes me. So to dare great things for Christ, which I know is like the motto for the St. John Institute, which I love. For many, it's unless they're single, young, and have an entrepreneurial spirit, how in the world does it really apply to me? Like, dare great things. Not like, oh, I'll try this. Not dibble dabble for Christ. But what would you say to the average, but the majority of people who have this conflict?
Well, there's a lot of things you could say. You could say trust, and all that.
But they want practical.
I'm going to say, yeah, you're not going to get rid of your fear. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the action in the presence of fear. That's what courage is. Action in the presence of fear. You're going to have to, either you're going to be a slave of your fear and you're going to let your kids be eaten alive by demons, or you're going to fight and you're going to brave the dang wolf. That's the reality. So then you're like, well, okay, I'm going to fight, but like how and what if? I'm like, yep, walking on water is painful. We're not designed to walk on water. You got to turn yourself totally to Jesus, and then you got to try. Now, from a practical point of view, what I would say is most people are more capable than they give themselves credit for. And even when it comes to financial concerns, yeah, it might be uncomfortable, but downsizing never really hurt anybody. Maybe you're living in a lot different lifestyle than you really need. And that maybe that downsizing will save you. Number one. Number two, entrepreneurialism always burns bright in people's hearts. I mean, why are you so afraid of just going out there and starting your own thing? Everyone needs windows washed. Everyone needs, lawns cut. Everyone needs, to keep your freedom, you might have to scramble. You might have to change. Yep. That's unfortunate. No one wants that. I mean, we keep, and I lots of empathy and sympathy for that, and it's tough, but darn it all, you're tough, and you're tougher than what's going to be thrown at you. And, why not? Like, I mean, really, it's to be or not to be, Dr. Howard, and especially speaking to the men of the world, you know what, guys? Like, are you going to let your souls be dominated by another because you're afraid of financial hardship and scrambling? Who's got you held bound? The opinion of your dad, the opinion of your friends, the opinion of your brothers and sisters. Okay. But in the end, you're responsible for your family and for your church and for your country. And then you're going to have to deal with either I lived according to that responsibility and I acted and did my best, or I abdicated in the presence of a threat. If you're going to abdicate in the presence of a threat, I can't help you. I don't think Jesus allows cowards to follow him. I mean, I'm just going to say it. They can follow for a while, but eventually, when you give your life to Christ, he demands courage from us. If you run away from Christ, he'll let you run. So what is courage? It's action in the presence of fear. I've got to end up saying whether or not I'm going to let love be stronger than self-preservation. As soon as you do that, though, it is uncomfortable. But I don't know. Again, I encourage your listeners to start reading history books, because it's amazing what people have done with so little and how they've turned themselves around. Maybe your kids aren't going to get into Harvard. Maybe they don't need Harvard. Maybe a community college is going to be just fine. Maybe, in fact, you can't pay for your kids' high school tuition. Make them work. Maybe that's the best gift you'll ever give them. I tell you, when it comes to parenting, it's the dignity that you give your child and the pride in themselves and who they are deep inside. That's your gift. Well, that can be given oftentimes more easily out of poverty and out of challenge than it can be out of abundance. The real problem is you don't have pride in yourself. A guy who's got pride in themselves is like, I don't care, I'm going to make it work. but we allow ourselves to be abashed by the fears of what they're going to take away from us. It would be much worse for us to lose our freedom than to lose our abundance. Now, you could say, well, that's easy for you to say, Father Nathan. I'm like, is it? Is it? I've already done it. You think this poverty thing is something else? Oh, well, you don't even have to worry about it. That's because I'm already dead to it. I've gone through the journey that you're going to make. I'm on the other side saying, I got nothing, and I'm never going to have anything, not even my own coffin. I don't even know where I'm going to be buried, and then you want to get in my face and tell me I don't have to worry about it. That's because I already took the plunge, and that's why I'm leading. So, I that's not to belittle the realities of anxieties, and I get them. And you got to do your best. And I'm not saying you shouldn't live in comfort and all that. Go for it. I'm just saying there might be a moment in your life, and to just not be afraid. It's what profiteth a man to gain the whole world if he loses his soul, right? So like if you got your soul, you got enough. And I think, honestly, our kids need a better witness from us. Most Americans, we're not giving our kids soul. We're giving our kids stuff. And that's a detriment, because that makes them weak. Instead of teaching them who they are on the inside, and that nothing can determine that except, their freedom. And, man, pass that on is a much better thing.
Wow, great stuff. My mind's going through, like, what are my takeaways from all this? And I'm like, I just lost count after about 5 or 6 of them.
That's why I'm a 2-bit evangelist, but I do my best.
No, this has been great. I mean, just for those who, for our viewers, just a few things that really stood out for me, maybe they're for you as a little cap here as we wrap up, is we need more Davids. We don't need Goliaths. Really ponder that. Read the story of David and just look at what he came from and what he did at that moment, especially men. And in this time period especially, it's all about the ground game. Your local community is, especially as things deteriorate and collapse, is all you're going to have. So why not build that up? And then, just getting near the end, it was, you have to be able to take risks for the Lord. We focus so much on this side of the equation, and we don't even give God a chance to do great things with what we're giving him. I know that I work in that fear quite a bit because I have a wife and children. St. Paul wasn't making it up when he says, I'm not encouraging people to leave their spouses, but he says, like, it's better for you not to marry in really difficult times because your heart is divided. It's torn between your love for God and wanting to give everything, and then the practical exigencies that you have at home with your wife and children. He's like, you really need strong prayer and holiness, but it never removes. You still have to risk. Nothing ever just changes with people doing nothing. Evil will triumph, but there's always the small tide, a group that rises. And like Father said, I couldn't help but think of Braveheart. They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom. But that's true. Like, what do you have if you don't have freedom? So thank you, Father, so much for your time. Last word to you, easiest question of them all. How can people follow what you're doing at the St. John Institute, and what announcements would you like to give them so that they can have something to go check out?
stjohninstitute.org, SAINT, johninstitute.org. You got to write it out, is our website. On there, you'll see links to everything. We're going to be launching a blog that already exists. You can find it on that header. If you go to the header on the website, click on daregreatthings.org. We own that before Dr. Howard could buy it. We beat him to it.
I know.
Daregreatthings.org is our blog. Now, for those who are involved in leadership or interested in leadership, we do offer every Thursday a free phone call on leadership. And I focus in on business leaders especially, or professionals, because no one else does. And that's where I'm like, well, I'll do it. I mean, business lives matter, it's kind of my motto. So if you're interested in that, you're a business person or professional, and you'd like to learn how your faith intersects with that leadership, I go to our website, which is the St. John leadershipnetwork.org and sign up. And if you sign up, you get a text from me every Sunday, and then every Wednesday, Sunday homily for 2 minutes on leading your family. And then every Wednesday, a reminder about the code for the Thursday morning phone calls. So that's stjohnleadershipnetwork.org. And otherwise, of course, just for general stuff, sign up for our newsletter. It's not enough just to go to the website, everyone. You go to the website, then you'll forget. On the website, click on sign up for our newsletter. And what that does is get your email, and then you'll hear updates for us, things like that.
Awesome. Well, I encourage everybody. The call to action is to do that in addition to the other things we've learned. But go check out the website. See, there's a lot of things that Father offers with the St. John Institute. They have excursions. They have an Eagle Eye, things that I've attended, been a part of in the past that, like he was saying on the ground game, we've witnessed great conversions. We've seen couples being matched up and married. My wife will take credit for all of those, which I'm glad to give her because that's what she does. But it was simply because it was like, hey, let's do this. Let's bring Father in and let's have this event. So yes, go check out both of those websites. And then after you're done with that, there's one last thing you have to do. You have to go to FultonSheenMovement.com. You have to sign this petition. It takes 15 seconds, and let the world know that you want to bring to the altars Blessed Fulton Sheen, because everything that we're talking about, human formation, spiritual formation, all the things that today's saint needs, as Father says, the only thing that we can really be right now to respond, this is exactly what Fulton Sheen actually said too, is to be a saint. It's with this man. And so you'll find your army being built with that wisdom, the wisdom of Father Nathan and the St. John Institute. So FultonSheenMovement.com and fill out the petition, make your voice known, be a part of history. You help do it. Father, thank you so much. I can't wait to have you back again. You are definitely one of our favorite guests, and we're blessed to have known you for a long time. You've had a big impact on my marriage and family. So thank you. May God bless you and all the faculty, staff, community of the St. John Institute and your religious community.
Thanks so much.
Right is right if nobody is right. Wrong is wrong if everybody is wrong. And believe me, in this error-infested world, what we really need is a church and an authority that is right not when the world is right, but one that is right when the world is wrong.
Never in history has the prayer of the Rosary been more needed to save our families, our countries, and defeat the evils of the world than now. The Fulton Sheen Institute worked closely with the Roma Rosary to develop the most unique, beautiful, and meaningful rosary that was inspired by Fulton Sheen's World Mission Rosary. This special handcrafted rosary continues Sheen's passion to support the mission of the Church to evangelize the entire world. Each decade of the rosary has a different color, which corresponds with a different continent. Yellow for Asia, red for the Americas, white for Europe, blue for the nations of Oceania, and green for Africa. Each Fulton Sheen Aroma Rosary comes with a set of 4 pure essential oil blends that have been chosen for their therapeutic and theological significance. These blends correspond to the 4 mysteries of the Rosary. Simply choose the oil for the mystery of the day, drop a small drop in the palm of your hand, and massage the oil over the surface, being sure to catch the lava beads. You're good to go, and your prayer will linger longer with these beautiful aromatic notes. Every Fulton Sheen Aroma Rosary you purchase supports our mission to fight the battle for the hearts and souls of the Christian family and lead our world back to God. So visit the Fulton Sheen Institute's store and pick up your beautiful Fulton Sheen Aroma Rosary today. Get one for you, your family members, and your close friends, and don't forget your pastor. Thank you so much for your prayers and your support.